Welcome back to Combat Mission Cold War, where we're going to take a look at the M47 Dragon. The Dragon has built up some mimetic momentum in the combat mission community, thanks to the apparently uncanny ability of its missiles to miss their targets or plow into the ground. So I thought it'd be interesting to zoom in on that. We're going to go over how the Dragon works, what might make it difficult to aim and or guide, and why, despite its flaws, it's actually an incredible capability for the US forces in Combat Mission Cold War. So this is going to be a little bit different from the other unit guides. First, let's hit the technical side. The Dragon is a man-portable, shoulder-fired anti-tank guided missile system. It's got a range of 65 to 1000 meters, and its missiles carry a 140mm single-stage high-explosive anti-tank warhead. This generally won't penetrate the upper front plate and turret front of T-64s, T-72s and T-80s, but their lower front plates and side and rear armour are vulnerable, and older tanks like T-55s, T-62s are fair game, along with BMPs, BTRs and other light vehicles. The Dragon comes in two parts, a reusable tracker unit and disposable missile tubes. To fire the Dragon, the gunner attaches the sighting unit to a missile tube, then he lines up his target with the sights, depresses the safety and squeezes the trigger. This launches the missile, which flies off towards the target. In the back of the missile, there's an infrared flare and a long control wire that spools out and maintains connection with the launcher. The Dragon uses semi-automatic command to line of sight or SAC loss guidance. The tracker looks for the IR flare in the back of the missile, and then sends commands down the control wire to correct the missile's course so that it's flying in the middle of the crosshairs. So all the gunner has to do is keep his crosshairs on the target and the tracker will fly the missile to impact. Then the gunner detaches the tracker, discards the used missile tube and is ready to go again. Seems pretty straightforward, so let's have a think about what might cause Dragon to miss. Obviously, out of the gate we have basic technical failure. All weapons have a failure rate. For wire-guided ATGMs like the Dragon, missiles can misfire, control wires can snap, the tracker can be damaged, there's all kinds of things that can just go wrong. But the Dragon has a few characteristics that stand out from other ATGMs. Firstly, it's designed to be shoulder-launched. Most ATGMs are fired from a mount, like a tripod. So the sight the gunner is using to keep the crosshairs on the target is attached to a steady object. The Dragon, meanwhile, rests on the gunner's shoulder. So when the gunner moves, the whole tracker moves. Even if the target is stationary, the gunner has to, for example, breathe. And that's before we even get to battlefield conditions, where any number of things can cause the gunner to flinch or move. This isn't just about making it more difficult for the gunner to keep his crosshairs on the target, it's about the fact that the missile is trying to center itself in those crosshairs, and any kind of inadvertent movement is going to make it fly all over the place, especially as the range increases and tiny movements become magnified. Guiding from the shoulder makes it harder for the gunner to adjust their aim. They don't have fine controls for this like other ATGMs, they have to move their entire upper body whilst simultaneously keeping as steady as possible. Jerky movements could easily cause the missile to veer off course or even leave the view of the tracker entirely and fall out of control. And that's not all. Shoulder launching also means that the gunner is dealing with the weight of the weapon system. Some of this can be taken up by a front-mounted bipod, but most of the weight is literally shouldered by the gunner. When the Dragon is fired, the missile leaves the tube, and both the total weight and weight distribution of the weapon system rapidly change, something else that might throw the gunner's aim off. Compounding this, according to the manual, there will be a momentary delay from time of trigger squeeze until missile launch. Or in other words, the change in weight distribution is not directly linked to the gunner squeezing the trigger, there's a pause, and then the launch comes as a bit of a surprise. So the fact that the Dragon is SAC loss guided from the shoulder brings a lot of guidance problems, but we're not quite done yet. Most ATGMs are steered by control fins. When the guidance system sends adjustments to the missile, it acts on these by mechanically moving the fins. Dragon uses a different system. There are some stabilization fins at the rear of the missile, but corrections are made by a series of small rocket motors mounted to panels on the side of the missile. The missile spins as it flies downrange, and the guidance system fires off the rocket motors at the right intervals to adjust the flight path as required. Apparently, it makes a noise like popcorn. The downside to this is that the rocket motors have a limited supply of fuel. If there are too many adjustments and the fuel is used up, then the missile can't correct its course. We just saw how shoulder launching introduces a lot of difficulty into aiming with the Dragon. Not only will that increase the need for adjustments, but there's the distinct possibility of unintentional adjustments as well. Adding to this, Dragon missiles are pretty slow. They travel at about 100 meters per second, meaning it will take 10 seconds for the missile to reach out to its maximum range of a kilometer. That's a long time for the gunner to stay on target. And the difficulties in doing so mean that there's probably going to be a lot of adjustments, meaning that the fuel supply for the adjustment rockets gets used up fast. There's an awful lot of negative synergy here. We have a lot of interlacing factors that all magnify each other's negative effects on the Dragon's accuracy. However, this doesn't necessarily make the Dragon a poor weapons system. First and foremost, a lot of these problems are user-related and can be minimized by extensive training. Dragon's SAC-LOS system is infinitely easier to use than the MAC-LOS, or Manual Command Line of Sight, used by earlier ATGMs. Soviet AT-3 Sagas, for example, are far harder to use effectively, but that didn't stop the Egyptians from decimating Israeli armor in the early stages of the Yom Kippur War. Training can go a long way to mitigating technical problems. Second, we need to look at the Dragon in context. In the US Army, it's deployed at squad level. Every rifle squad is at least supposed to have one. That's an incredible capability. ATGMs obviously exist in other nations' tables of organisation and equipment. The Soviets had the AT-4, the Brits have Milan, and so on. But these are all company-level assets. A Soviet BTR company has 3 AT-4s or AT-7s. A US infantry company has 9 Dragons. Granted, the Dragon is comparatively shorter range than other contemporary ATGMs, but down at squad level it's competing against the likes of the RPG-7 and the Carl-Gustav. These are both effective weapons, but they're much shorter ranged, unguided, and the Dragon has a chunkier warhead, 140mm compared to the 84 of the Gustav and 93mm of the PG-7VL rockets for the RPG. It's also important to look at what the Dragon replaced when it entered service in 1975. Before Dragon, US rifle companies had 2 anti-tank teams in their weapons platoon armed with M47 recoilless rifles, weapons which were adopted in 1959. For all its flaws, Dragon definitely represents a clear step forward. So Dragon is a cut above its competitors. While it has problems, these can be mitigated to some extent, and perhaps most importantly, it's a good fit for the anticipated highly mechanized warfare of a Cold War gone hot in Europe. An infantry squad with a 1,000 meter "Don't Tread on Me" guided anti-armor bubble is a much more dangerous prospect than one with an effective unguided range of 400 meters or less if it was armed with the Carl-Gustav or the RPG-7. So that's a real quick once-over of Dragon. This is really interesting for 2 reasons. First, that the technical characteristics of weapons have a significant impact on their effectiveness. That might sound mind-blowingly obvious, but on the surface, a weapon like Dragon is a short-ranged ATGM, and it can be a mystery why it seems to struggle to hit things in a game like Combat Mission. It's only when you dig deeper and get a better understanding of the details, like how shoulder launching and SAC-LOS are a really bad combination, that it starts to make sense. The details matter. Second, that despite its shortcomings, Dragon has its strengths. It might be difficult to hit a traversing tank at 900 meters with an M47, but it's basically impossible with a Carl-Gustav or an RPG, and other ATGMs are the preserve of specialist teams, not things you can hand out to every single rifle squad. None of this gets away from the Dragon's poor reputation in Combat Mission though, so I did a bit of testing. Firing 200 Dragons at stationary T-55s at 800 meters, the Dragons came away with a first shot hit rate of 78.5%. which is actually really good. There was some obvious variation. I did the test in batches of 20, and if you were unlucky enough to get the batch with 12 hits and 8 misses, then yeah, the M47 doesn't look so good. But overall, as modelled in Combat Mission, it averages out to being surprisingly effective, at least in the narrow circumstances of the testing. So at least from a Combat Mission perspective, the inputs contributing to Dragon's poor reputation might be more psychological and anecdotal, rather than factually based. In a lot of ways, I think the Combat Mission experience of Dragon has been fundamentally tainted by Javelin. Javelin essentially takes all the problems that Dragon has, fixes them without compromising on the ability to be man-portable and shoulder-launched, and then ramps up its effect on target range and guidance. The problem for Dragon is that Javelin entered the consciousness of the Combat Mission community first, and I think it's become the point of comparison for ATGMs. If Combat Mission Cold War had come out before Shock Force and Black Sea, I think we'd be looking at Javelin as an upgrade to Dragon, rather than looking at Dragon as a downgrade to Javelin. Anyway, a bit of a more narrowly focused unit guide to hit the letter D. Let me know what you think about the Dragon in the comments. Hope you all enjoyed this video and found it interesting. I'll catch you in the next one.